I put a call out into my network a couple of weeks ago asking anyone who may know someone who has lived with someone with narcissistic tendencies and is qualified to talk about it to see if they would be a guest on this show. I was surprised at the resulting responses. I really just didn't know how how much this would touch people. And it made me convinced that it was a really good topic. Even in creating the introduction to this episode and to another one that's going to follow in a couple of weeks, it was difficult. I usually record the conversation and then just sort of mull it over as I'm editing. How can I introduce this in a way that gives you an idea of what we're talking about, but also allows you to be kind of invested in the conversation so that you'll listen, right? This one was tough. We ended up talking for over 2 hours. I've edited the conversation down to maybe an hour and a half, which is crazy long. But I felt like if I were to cut anything else out, it would be, you would lose the benefit of the conversation. So some caveats that need to be expressed. The 2 women I will be talking with have experience around various types of abuse within relationships. They coach in their various ways. They admit they are not therapists. Even if they were therapists, this is not the platform to be giving advice, life-changing advice. So I try to repeat that often throughout the conversations. I am most definitely not qualified to give advice. So why even have the conversation? This is how I see it. It's kind of how I imagine it is for people who have for a long time felt unwell, physically unwell, and they go to the doctors and they get the test back and no, everything's fine. Everything's fine. We don't know what's wrong. And even if it's not said, it's kind of implied. It's in your head. It's all in your head. And the frustration that comes with that, because you know instinctively, I don't know what's wrong, but I know there's something wrong. And then imagine somebody steps up and they look at your charts and they look at your symptoms and say, oh, no, I recognize what's wrong. And they give you a diagnosis. Does that make having the sickness better? Of course not. But I could imagine that there would be a comfort in knowing that someone gets it, that they understand how you feel. And while they may not be able to advise you, they can say, these are some things I experienced. So maybe look for those. And if you ever need to talk, I am here. And some of the things that I did may or may not be helpful, but I'm willing to share. It's not a huge stretch to apply that to living in challenging, emotionally and mentally challenging relationships. We will not be qualified to give advice. Again, even if my guests are qualified, it would be such a personal thing that it would require talking to them before they could give any direction. So the purpose of these episodes is to let you know that you're not alone and hopefully you'll find some comfort in knowing that there are others who have lived through similar pains and have, in the words of Sonia Lynn, the second guest that I'll have on this topic, in her words, they've sat through the fire of it, and as they've made it out the other side, they've recognized that they could do more than they thought. So that is why we're tackling a pretty big topic. So the first of two, Tammy Jordan is going to be my guest in the conversation today. You will see a number of links in the show notes, including hers, as well as some books and authors that she has found comforting or encouraging. So I hope you enjoy. I'm really grateful that you are taking your time to talk about this. Maybe you can just introduce yourself and explain why this is an important topic for you, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. So I am a consultant, an organizational development consultant. I work with organizations on leadership development, organizational change strategy, and also just completed a book called Returning to Whole. That it's kind of like a memoir of sorts about my experience, relationship with my dad, who, in my opinion, I don't have, just as we get that, I'm not a clinician, but was a narcissist and had narcissistic behaviors. So I kind of talk about, and the reason why I like to introduce myself as both an organizational development consultant, leadership consultant, and talk about my personal life is I do believe that the things that we experience in life connect to our soul purpose somehow. And I talk about in the book in embracing the compassion and empathy around the line of trauma that I experienced, that my father experienced. I've been able to connect my soul purpose of what I do for a job is partly a training ground for my childhood of understanding human behavior.
Oh, I see. So no accident that you've chosen the career you have. I see.
No.
Okay.
That some of the behaviors that we see in the workplace was really me trying to survive as a child. So some of the behaviors that I hear survivors talk about: walking on eggshells, avoiding, appeasing, accommodating, constantly managing the energy of somebody else. That's what happens with a narcissist, right? You are constantly trying to diffuse what could potentially be a hot mess, for lack of a better term, right? Okay, the person's going to explode. If I do X, Y, and Z, I can manage it so that the person doesn't do that. And a lot of times, whether you are a spouse of somebody that happened to, or a parent, you're trying to protect other people, right? For me, at some point it shifted where trying to protect my mother and my grandmother who I lived with. And a lot of times children will do that for their siblings as well. One sibling, maybe it's the oldest one or whatever, will try to become the buffer to manage the abuser's energy. Or the spouse will do that for their children, right? And that's why it's really hard to leave, is because they know that once they leave, narcissists sometimes will do anything in their power, because it's about power and control, to take the children away. So what's interesting is that when I see toxic cultures in organizations, oftentimes there's someone that will exhibit some of these behaviors, and it has the same impact in a group. And oftentimes it's more subtle, but it's still there. And again, that managing that energy, or understanding the energy between the dyads or triads of people, of what's happening.
Let's try to address some of this, because I can very easily come from the direction of the person who doesn't know much about narcissists. I'll be honest, the first time I heard it was through a friend of mine whose relationship had to be severed when she recognized that her husband was narcissistic. And when she told me that, I remember thinking, I don't know. I know the fable of, behind the name, but I didn't know anything else. And I hadn't really thought too much about it since then. And then I came across a video on YouTube, of all things, and listening to this doctor talk about it, about narcissistic tendencies, narcissistic personalities, being in a relationship with a narcissist, made me think of my friend only by the name of it. But then listening to what life was like in that relationship just drew me in, and I became compelled to want to know more. The reason I wanted to have the conversation with you and somebody else later on actually is because I realized if this is how it's affecting me, I know I cannot be the only person. And I felt this sense of pain from the familiarity, but then also the relief of knowing, oh, it's not just me. And I don't mean the whole like, well, you're not the only one who has to deal with this. I don't mean that. I mean, kind of, like, okay, there's a name to it. Kind of like a diagnosis. Like if you're sick and somebody tells you, well, this is what the problem is, it's really sad to know that you have that problem, but there's some sort of relief and empowerment in knowing, oh, this is an actual thing. This is a thing. So could you address what are we talking about when we talk about narcissistic tendencies, personality, and being in a relationship with somebody who has these tendencies?
Sure. Well, I think that that's very common, your experience of not even knowing that you potentially in it or experienced it, or like I didn't know until I started doing, I was well into my 30s of understanding, and this is something I was for my whole life dealing with, but I think we could do a better job, I guess, in really talking because to our children or educating our children around abnormal psychology because it's everywhere. That there's not a whole or normal person. Like what is normal, right? So, and really, when we're talking about, in my experience, talking about narcissism, there's really a wide range, right? And that's why I like to designate that I'm not a clinician, because you have to have so many of these behaviors before you're clinically diagnosed, right, as a narcissist. But with that said, one of the things that you said was the relief, I think, comes from one of the behaviors, which is gaslighting. Gaslighting is behavior to make you feel kind of crazy.
Okay, so talk about that. Yeah.
Yes. So you'll try to hold up your boundaries. Okay, so my dad would call and say, I saw you. This was a very specific situation. I was in high school. He said, I saw you at the fair. And I was like, what? It was like, you were there? Like, why didn't you say hello? Well, you wouldn't recognize me anymore. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? And so it was his way of saying that he cared in this really weird sense, that he was around, that he was watching me, that he knew who my friends were, that I wouldn't recognize them. And I was like, first of all, that's weird, right? I think that's weird. So my instinct is going off that that's weird. But I'm also, because I'm 14, going, like, what is this really about? The gaslighting happened afterwards, where then and I didn't realize at the time when he was having the conversation with me that he was drunk, because he wasn't drunk, he was buzzed right at that point. Later, when I would bring up the topic of whatever, remember, Dad, I didn't say that.
And is it possible he didn't remember it, or is it just this little weird game?
No, yeah. Well, sometimes I thought it was possible that he didn't remember it, because again, I then figured out the drinking thing, and I was like, oh, well, maybe he did. So I was giving him the benefit of the doubt. But it is this weird game of calling your reality crazy.
And what's the point in that? I don't get it.
Yeah, and all it is again, it's a power and control issue. Narcissists, in my opinion, are extraordinarily insecure. Some of the other behaviors, they can never admit when they're wrong. They can never say, oh, I was wrong, or I didn't. You know what? You're right. I was totally out of bounds when I said that. And if they do, it's strategic for another reason of, like, they know that they've pushed you too far, so they got to reel you back in. So they got to tell you what you need to hear, which then also adds to the crazy making. And what I say crazy making is you feel nuts. You feel like, am I the only one that remembers how the last conversation went when you said the blah, 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 blah? And then you bring it up and the person gaslights you of like, oh, no. That's not how it went.
Right.
And then I'm sorry you feel that way.
Isn't that the worst apology in the world? Oh, I'm sorry if that bothered you.
I'm sorry if that bothered you, but that's my truth. Or they'll even use your own words against you. It's what I called, before I knew the term, it's what I called verbal karate. My father had a masterful way of fighting with your words, of a very subtle, manipulative really subtle way of making you feel inferior, insecure, stupid, and unstable. And that, again, and then you're second guessing yourself. And what I think occurs to a lot of people, and that's why I talk so much about instinct and listening to your gut, especially even at work or anywhere, is that someone has destroyed your ability to trust yourself. That's really what narcissists do. Because if you don't trust yourself, they've got total control. Because then it's the codependency starts. And then the codependency is, I give my identity over to you because I need you, because I don't know who I am anymore.
And it's so insidious and subtle. That's one thing that
it's so subtle. And you start here and you end up, whoa, way down here, and you don't even know that you're down there.
Yes. I remember growing up and I would see some of the relationships that my friends were in, and I would think, how can they talk? I would never put up with that. I cannot believe that they're putting up, they're a strong person. And then looking at the choices that I have made in my relationships and realizing, oh, I'm that person. And I just never thought that I could be. And that, I think, is an important point. So please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. So what I have learned from listening to this doctor on YouTube is this is not necessarily a trait that we are born with. Now, there are maybe tendencies within our personality that, given certain environmental circumstances, a person will become narcissistic. Is that accurate from your understanding? And let me correct it before I make sure I'm asking the question right. So she made the statement, 2 people can grow up with the same circumstances that maybe abandonment and all of these different issues that will affect their psyche and affect them emotionally. One, because of their personality, may become codependent and may be the enabler who's just trying to fix everything. And the other will go the other way and become the narcissist, who's then controlling the enabler who's trying to fix everything. Does that sound accurate to you? What's your take on that? Okay.
Yes. So I came up in the concept of the book, I came up with the idea of the keystone. And the keystone is like, in the archway, the keystone is the block that holds the whole arch up. Yep. Basically, what I defined for myself is the keystone of our parents, are the people, and I'm going a roundabout way to answer your question.
That's okay.
Okay. It's very codependent. There's a lot of dynamics going on. And one of the things I realized that my father had planted some fake keystones in my life, and one of them was, I don't matter. It was a belief system that I had, that he comes first, manage, so everyone can be peaceful because this is crazy. So Tammy puts her needs last. Okay. If I do that, I'm basically telling myself I don't matter. My needs don't matter. So I took this on, not consciously. I took it on just to survive, right? When I went to go try to take that down and say, no, wait a minute, I matter. And let me tell you how I matter. You're not going to do that to me anymore. The whole structure comes down. Because his role, everyone's intertwined, right? So the one sibling that went to the narcissist behavior model, right? Because it's a coping mechanism. It's an overcompensation in my mind for insecurity. It's the ego's way of just running amok. The other one went the other way, right? One sibling went this way. And they can't both be a narcissist, because that would be like, crazy train fighting, and
plus they would avoid each other. So
they would avoid each other.
They would have no one to control. Yeah, okay.
And then also another dynamic that narcissists do with their children, especially, is they'll put one on a pedestal. So if you research pedestal child versus the scapegoat child, anything that went wrong in the family, it was that child's fault. The other one was the pedestal. The child was perfect, because narcissists need supply, meaning they need ego supply. So if they keep one on a pedestal, that person's like, oh, my father or my mother is great. They're great. What are you even talking about? So then they add to the gaslighting for the unwittingly, because they don't, right, unintentional. This isn't conscious because they're a child, to the other sibling being, and they convince that the other child, that other child's a bad child. Right. So then it forces them into these roles, right? When I talked at the beginning about, there's a line, and this is where the compassion and empathy started. my trauma that I'm trying to resolve in my life, or some people talk about, cutting cords or breaking the energy cord. There's a cord in my line, meaning my father, and my father's mother, and I talk about my father's mother in the book, that I'm certain I can trace this back. I'm 100% certain that it comes from a line of trauma, of invalidation, and Freud talks about, I think your relationship with your opposite sex parent has a lot to do with your emotional stability as an adult. And I haven't, taken a deep dive too much into that research, but I do believe that there's an element of truth to that. And so I know for sure that my father's self-confidence, his self-worth is directly connected to his mother kind of shaming him. And I talk in the book about every time my father would get drunk and get upset, he would talk about an instance where his mother hit him in the face and called him a really derogatory name. And my father had a lot of shame around the fact that he was gay and not accepted. And so all of that, I think, contributed to some of these behaviors, right? And he, in his mind, got some of that from his mother. I wonder if his mother got that from her father. Do you see what I'm saying? Like,
I do. It's like the zipper.
So the line, yes, like a zipper. And so, I think so much of my work has been diving deep and to be like, especially because I had a son. I have a 3-year-old little boy. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I gotta figure this out so I can stop it. Right. I mean, I get emotional about it because it's also a slippery slope in regard to the codependency. My mother's side of the family played into this a little bit because my grandmother, who I was raised with's father was an alcoholic. And she was the oldest of 4 kids who sheltered her siblings from. So she was the appeaser. And so she taught me that he's still your father. Mm-hmm. So if you ask a lot of therapists about, narcissists, they'll tell you the only true way to really get away is to cut off all communication. You can't negotiate with a true narcissist. Well, my grandmother, we were raised in, he's still your father, you still have to have contact. It wasn't until she passed that I was like, this is crazy train. Why do I have to tolerate someone literally abusing me with their words?
Right.
And every day. Right. I don't need this. Again, it's all a twisted mind game. Like, I moved across town and I specifically said, okay, well, this was in my 20s. I'm not going to tell him where I am. Cut off communication. I was getting married for the first time. He wasn't invited to the wedding, which was that was a big boundary line that I didn't know if it was going to be upheld. I really didn't know if he was going to just show up or not. And families with narcissists also, the whole family they don't have a good sense of boundary.
Of course not. Yeah.
So when I told the other family members that were coming, I told them, listen, he's not invited. I had no idea whether they were going to basically tell him where it was. And so I moved across town and somehow he found me. I suspect that he was working for the post office at the time. And so my mailman said that he knew my father. I think he just found out my address because of that. And then the second thing is, around that time, we're talking about boundaries. I went to the dentist. I didn't know that my father had the same dentist, which was really bizarre that we even, out of all the dentists in the area, we had the same dentist. The dentist, talk about HIPAA regulation, started talking to me about how it was awful that I never invited my father to my wedding. So they go around, that's another behavior. They go around and they tell lies, spread lies in order to build a case for them. And the ones that are really dangerous, in my opinion, and I've worked with some survivors of this, are ones, narcissists that have a lot of resources, meaning power, and or they have money. Because they will doesn't matter to them, they will throw hundreds of thousands of dollars at attorneys, right, to discredit the people that are in their wake or their path. So those are the hardest one. A lot of times in those situations, people have had to literally move across country in order to get away.
I think we need to once again try to view this from the perspective of somebody who doesn't know They know what we're talking about because they recognize it, but they don't know exactly what we're talking about. There's a dichotomy that you acknowledged, that the person we're talking about seems very powerful, very controlling, and yet the seed is insecurity.
Yes.
And that's the part I think that can be so tricky. So for instance, in my experience with a number of people who I have chosen to be in relationships, friendships, or whatever with, they have this persona of being almost bravado. And it's so attractive to somebody who I would see this person as being strong, secure, like they know themselves, they've got their stuff together. And so that's very attractive to somebody who is not that, because you just see it as a sense of security. When in fact, it's very much the opposite. It is their insecurity. Again, you can correct me, but it seems like it's their insecurity that puts this face, that makes that face so important. That the perception is they are unflappable, that nothing will touch them. And by extension, nothing will hurt the people they love. So if I love you, you are protected by me. No one will ever hurt you again. Nobody will ever hurt you again. Okay.
Except for me, because I can.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because their insecurity keeps coming out in these really weird, really toxic ways.
And again, it's subtle. Subtlety is really the key word. Subtle and slow reveal is so they're very charismatic.
Mm.
So I think personally, I teetered on some in my 20s. I think this is really even hard for me to say. I still have it. It's what I call narcissism wounds, meaning I don't want to believe that I'm a narcissist. However, I have narcissistic wounds. And in my 20s, had I not had some key players really shake me a little bit, I think I might have gone down the same road.
Why?
I think so that to me.
Why do you feel that way?
I can do it. I can do it to people like you wouldn't believe. Mm. I'm aware that I'm doing it and I know that it's wrong.
What's the it? That's so important, if you don't mind saying.
No. It's going to sound it's not egomaniacal. It just is. But within a 15, 20-minute conversation with somebody, I can feel my way to understand their highlights, what they love, what they're afraid of, and because I can see all of that, I can use it. Listen, I'm not proud that I can say this.
It's okay. It's okay. I totally get what you're saying.
Do you get what I'm saying?
Yes.
This is the narcissist. Yes. Like if they had a toolkit, this is what and many of them, I swear, many of them don't even know they're doing it. They did this to survive. They manage somebody else.
Right.
When you manage people in order to survive, in order for that child to survive, you got to assess the situation in like a heartbeat, feel it all out and figure out what they got to do in order to get by.
Yes.
That's what makes me great at my job. But what I had to come to terms with in my 20s was you have an extraordinary gift, but there's a power in that. And you've got to hold I'm getting even emotional. You have to hold people's energy like sacred.
Yep.
And you don't have a right to rearrange them.
Yep. I understand. It's so fascinating. And I would never have said this. So listening to this doctor, I had certain relationships in mind because I was like, oh, I totally understand this. And then there were a few things she said, and I thought, oh, is that me? Is that me? Because I know, and I will say this, I'm not going to throw anyone else under the bus, but I will say I was the chameleon. Like, will you like me if I do this? Will you like me if I do this? Which is absolutely an insecurity, but it's also manipulative because I wasn't being honest with myself or with the people I was around, which is sad when you think of it being with when a child acts that way. That's just sad because you just think, oh, they're lost. But you start going into your 20s and you're still doing it for the same reason because you're just like, will somebody like me? Will anyone like me? but
for who you are.
who in the
Right.
world was
Just
I?
for just right, but for just who you are. Like that's a foreign thought that you
Yeah.
could be loved
Oh, yeah.
for being exactly who you are. Like
Yep.
that is a very foreign thought when you've been abused by a
But
narcissist.
right, I so appreciate your openness to that because it's helpful, like hugely helpful, and it shows that it isn't just straight down the middle that you are a narcissist or you are an insecure enabler. That it is just so messed up.
It's so messed up. Yeah, and the the uncanny ability, that's why I think they're so charismatic, is because when you meet them for the first time, there's a sense of, you know, confidence. It comes across as confidence,
Yeah.
not ego or narcissism. You know what I mean? Like it comes across as they're confident in themselves. They talk openly. They understand me. That's if someone feels, if you have a meeting with somebody and it feels like they understand you too much too fast, or if they move too fast. So if your relationship and all of a sudden they went from, you know, 0 to 90, you know, head over heels, fallen in love, and there's no sense of boundaries, right, from the beginning. Again, that's another red flag. Sometimes narcissists will also, they will look for opportunity. Everything, a lot of things for them is around survival, so it's very transactional.
What do you mean? The transactional part. I mean, so what would people be? That's what I guess we need to do, because I feel like you and I could talk about this forever for just some reason. It's
yeah, there's a lot to it.
It seems so. Yeah. Like, so
yes.
if you see this, then just recognize that there may be something you need to be aware of. So that's something I should have said at the beginning. We are not trying to point fingers and say people are bad. We're not trying to say that if you're in this situation that you're hopeless. Simply to say, this is the experience that you have had, and these are things to look for. So let's do that.
And I would add to that, it's complicated, it's messy, and it's unique to the person. One thing that never served, and one thing that never served me was someone saying, you know, it isn't cutting off contact. It isn't as simple as that.
Right.
You know, for some people that are protecting their children, they can't just wake up and walk away. This is all about empowerment, in my mind, to empower others to make better decisions. This isn't, and honestly, there really is no judgment in where people are at, because these individuals, some of them that are very good, that are probably full narcissists, whatever we term that to be, no one sees them coming. Even the healthiest of healthy, meaning the only people that would probably see them coming are ones that have, through their own process of before being victimized, and or clinical therapist, right? Because they're very subtle and very hard. However, you can be aware of something. So relationships that move from 0 to 90, like overnight.
Okay. So that's one thing. You mentioned transactional, and I cut you off. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay, because I think that was a really important point too, around, and we're not here to fix anybody. We're here to empower with personal experience and knowledge from what we've experienced. When they get into a fight, or they can go cold. And this is a trauma wound that I still have. I can go very cold, meaning, and my spouse would be the first one. God bless him. If he were here, he'd be like, "Oh, Tammy can go." And I shut down. And when I say shut down, it's very like, it feels as though the person doesn't even love you anymore, even though you've had a fight. And for me, what I've learned is that you have to view, I did that as a survival mechanism to separate myself so I don't feel. Because if I don't feel, then I can survive. I literally compartmentalize, and it's almost like a disassociation. For them, they view almost all of it that way, because they don't, in my experience, they don't really understand. It's so funny that we started talking about dogs before we started recording. We were talking about dogs and their ability to have unconditional love. I don't think narcissists understand everything is conditional to them. Everything has a thing attached to it. My father used money. If you do this, you get child support past 18, because I don't have to do that for you. I do that because, or you think this is bad? You think what I'm telling you is bad? Try having your father beat the living, crap out of you because of da 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 da. I never raised a hand. That's a condition. Look at this isn't as bad because of this. I give you this because you deserve this. Unconditional love, like parental love, is like the dog love. They bleed love. It's unconditional. Parental love is supposed to be that way. When you don't have it, or it's conditional, you learn that you don't learn to love yourself unconditionally. Because you don't learn how to love yourself conditionally, there's a lot of self-loathing. And then that self-loathing is so painful to have inside all the time that it gets projected onto other people. So that self-loathing becomes a transaction, which is where everything is contingent, or everything is a if this, then that. So Brene Brown's work around shame, I highly recommend for people who if they want to understand a little bit. I think shame has a big part of it because Brene talks a lot about armor, right? If I can't be wrong, that's another thing narcissists, they can't accept criticism. So that's another red flag. If you say, hey, can I share something with you? And even, again, my husband's name is Tom. Sometimes Tom, if I'm not in the right space, I get really defensive around critique, any sort of critique, or Tammy, you did this right. Tammy, hey, can you not do this again? I asked you not, or can you try not to? And he'll say that I bite his head off a lot, or
it's really personal, right? It feels really
so personal, and I have a really hard time hearing it. Is because my father used to use that against me. So not only was there gaslighting, but it was, you didn't do this, you disappointed me, you're disgusting, the name calling, the B word, the C word, like you name it. And I was probably 15, 16. So if I stay perfect, then maybe, just maybe he'll love me. If you can, let that, so every time I have to remember that Tom isn't my dad. My husband isn't my dad. He's trying to help me, or my clients that give me critiques on my evaluations for work, right? It's taken me a long time to read that and be like, you know what? And I can do it now. I can read it and say, that's really good feedback. And that's what made me question whether I was turning into a narcissist or not. Because when I first saw that glimmer of like, that person's crazy. They just don't. And I would judge, right? I would say, they're nuts. They're stupid. I'm the expert, right? All of that posturing crap, all the puffing is garbage. All that puffing is just defense. It's just Tammy trying to protect herself from someone.
Yeah. Okay. So being transactional, the whole going 0 to 90, kind of overwhelming you with them.
Yeah, they're desperately in love. Desperately in love. Can't imagine their life without you, like within 4 hours. That kind of weirdness.
Okay. And then the gaslighting again, what would that be?
Gaslighting is making you feel crazy.
Okay.
So making you feel that what you said wasn't true. If there's a fight and I say fight, an argument, and you come back and you say, what really bothered me is when you said this, and they'll look at you, full straight face, look at you and be like, you didn't say that. Yeah, I did. I said that this and this. No, sorry. You must have been making stuff up again.
Okay. So that's gaslighting. So what are the things to look for, which is so tricky because it isn't, this is what I have found it and just listening to and looking into all of this. There are some, we might call them disorders, that they are clinical and there's like a checklist. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, you can be diagnosed and you have this. That's just what it is. This seems to be quite a bit more tricky because it may be just some of them, but having just some of them is enough to wreak havoc.
Yes.
And because you don't have to have all of the tendencies, it's really easy for the other, I'm just going to say for me. So I'm looking at these things and I'm thinking, well, yeah, I recognize this, this, and this in the person, but not this and this. So maybe I'm overstating. So not all of the things fit. So I'm probably just making too much of it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Do you know what I
It
mean?
makes total sense. So if I were to give a shortcut to that, right? Because do I think there are a lot of narcissists out there, full-fledged clinical diagnosed narcissists? No. Do I think there are a lot of people with narcissistic behaviors? Hell yes. And so I think, right, that's the gamut that we're talking about. And I'm included in the narcissistic behaviors that I'm not proud of. I think the shortcut really is, do you trust yourself? If someone around you makes you feel like you don't trust yourself, that's a problem that you should probably dig in a little deeper into.
And we're not saying, just to clarify, we're not saying that you shouldn't have people who challenge you or, who look at you and say, hey, this is probably not the best way. So we're not saying to surround yourself with yes people.
No. I would say trust, the trust makes you feel like your truth isn't real.
Mm.
We may not agree with it, but we have to meet them where they are. If someone doesn't meet us where we are, I'm not saying they're a narcissist. I'm saying that's probably not the best relationship for us to, it's not the optimal. And the other thing is, if someone sounds crazy, but if someone just kind of makes you feel like poop,
yeah,
like there's been people where I walk away and go, you know what? I always feel like I'm tired. I always feel like I'm this is hard. Like I'm working hard to do something and I'm walking away not validated. Like everyone wants to be seen, heard, and understood. Everybody. And if you're in any relationship with someone feeling perpetually that you're never seen or you're never heard, I think that's the shortcut, or at least it is for me.
And I just have to say, I keep interrupting you, and I'm totally just speaking from my own understanding. And yet, that same person can say things that should make you feel like you are the most important person in the world.
At times.
Which feels like an impossible position to be in. Because that is when you certainly second guess yourself. Because, that person, it has to be me. Because they said that they love me more than anything in the world. So that other stuff that I think they did, it has to be me. It can't be them.
Yeah. So to that point, the yo-yoing. Yo-yoing.
Is that really a thing? I
don't know. I just made it up, I think, in my head.
I like that.
They know just how far to push you before they got to rope you back in. That's the yo-yo. Meaning, if you're constantly like I always felt like I was constantly in a coming or going. So I've seen this. This mostly happens, I think, in the spousal narcissist abuse, the partner narcissist abuse, because you're an adult, right? And it's a different type of meeting, meaning you've met as an adult. So there'll be a huge fight, or there'll be a disagreement, or maybe there was that point where they said things that made you really feel awful about yourself. And then the recovery, right? The flowers. They'll be at a dinner, or you'll be at a dinner 2 weeks later or a week later with some friends, and they will glow and gleam about you. To the outside world, that's really what's critically important.
And you're so lucky to have him.
Oh, because exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because then that adds to the crazy making, and they know it, meaning in your own head. Because if everyone else thinks that they're wonderful too, it's really hard to break out. It's really hard for others to see what you see, because they don't see.
Right.
So these behaviors that are not socially or okay, the lashing out, the making you feel like you can't trust yourself, they'll never do that in public. That's another flag. They will never do that in front of other people. One friend of mine told me that she was getting ready to leave. Like she just knew, like she just felt it in her core. She was getting ready to leave. Well, they bought their in-law, the mother-in-law, tickets to a concert. And they said, well, I'm going to take your mom. And that woman knew, oh my God, he's really trying. Look he's trying to be with my mom and blah, blah. That was a very strategic initiative in order to get Faith back.
It's so strange because I guess at first I would have assumed that there's no ability, no empathy, so no ability to understand how other people feel. And yet there has to be some level of that in order to be able to read people. It's so strange. And maybe empathy is the wrong word. You know what I mean, though?
No, I think empathy is a key word. And I don't know enough about this. This would be if you have a clinician to ask this question. But I think that sociopaths, psychopaths don't have empathy. So they're very strategic, manipulative, charismatic. I think the difference is that the narcissists do have empathy. It's just a messed up way of looking at how to use it.
Right. It's like their control button.
It's the control button. Yeah. It's I have empathy for you only when you're doing things for me.
Yeah.
Right? So I can turn it on and off, which is really weird. Again, it's that transaction or that tit for tat, or conditional love. So I guess that, I'm not sure if that would be classified in the definition of empathy, but I think
it's weird, right?
But I think what's weird is they have it. It's like,
maybe it's more in their mind, like they recognize how you're feeling, and so they know how to respond or how to act.
Yes.
What they want or what they need.
That's where I was going with it. It almost seems like they can empathize because what is empathy?
I've always understood empathy to be kind of like, I feel your pain. I can put myself in your position and I can feel what you feel, even if I have not experienced what you're experiencing. So I can take myself
There's a quick little video where, again, Brene Brown talks about the differences between empathy and sympathy. And someone did like a cartoon of it. And she talks about Teresa Wiseman, who's a nursing scholar, had, I think, 4 characteristics of empathy. And one of them was perspective taking, that you can take the perspective of somebody else. So can narcissists do that? Yes, they can.
Okay.
Feeling with somebody so that you recognize the emotion that somebody has. And then you can go to a place within yourself to connect with that emotion. So I think they have the ability to empathize, because that's why I think sometimes they're so charismatic, is that they can take the perspective of others. I think the challenge is the intention.
Right.
What is their intention to do with it? Right? Like if I'm empathic to others in my life, it's because I want to have that empathy with them so I can help, right? Or so I can make them feel better. Empathy fuels connection, that I'm another human being, that I can feel with you and I can understand what that feeling is and go to a very vulnerable place in myself. I just found it.
The vulnerability.
The vulnerability. I don't think the narcissist is capable of going to the vulnerable place in themselves and showing that vulnerability to somebody else and saying, you know what you're feeling right now, it's not the same, but let me share an experience with my life, and having that other person know that vulnerability about them.
Right.
I don't think they're comfortable in doing that.
I think that makes sense. So they can do mad, but they can't do sad.
Yes.
So they can see someone in pain and that can anger them because of the injustice or because of the sadness it makes them feel. They react and they get angry about it because they're just so uncomfortable with that sadness and that like hurt feeling. And they don't know what to do with it.
So I'm going to add to that. I think some are actually capable of showing you sad and connecting with you sad, but they're not going to tell you anything about themselves about that feeling, because they're going to think you're going to use it against them, because that's what they do.
Wow.
But if I have a close relationship with somebody, a potential partner or a friend or even a coworker, and I'm vulnerable enough to say, you know what, you think of loss or grief, I hear you, and sit with the person and say, I had a similar situation where I felt this, and really just kind of talking about sharing in that emotion and sitting with the other, not trying to fix it, not trying to make it go away, but just sitting with the other person. Now that other person knows that about me, knows that story. And I think the narcissist would view that as an opportunity for somebody else.
Yeah.
Because that's how they view.
It's like the soft spot now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so that's when I say, or when I said before earlier on that I wasn't proud that I could sit in a situation and talk to somebody for 20 minutes, find their soft spot, and put it in the back of my brain. I was like, why am I doing that? Why am I looking for people's soft spots? And then, like, what am I, but I think that's what sometimes happens. It's constantly a game of who's going to attack me and what do I need to know about that person in case they attack. They're constantly on defense so that they can be on the offense if something happens.
Right. Which implies then that a person could, and I realize it seldom, if ever, happens, but a person could choose not to be, like you have chosen to do something else with that.
Yes.
But once a person goes the other way and chooses the narcissistic path, my understanding is it's very, very difficult for them to backpedal and decide there's a better way to be. And like,
yes,
it's time to change.
And I think my father did in his later years. For example, when I got married to my second husband, him and his partner were invited to the wedding, and they came, and all the energy leading up to the wedding, he had upheld all the boundaries. And I was really had this hope that he changed. And soon after the wedding, I started getting crazy messages through Facebook again. And my heart just sunk because, even if I think about it now, I was like, I was still that little girl who just wanted a dad to just love unconditionally, hold the boundaries that I asked. And I thought I got it. And he came to the wedding, but he went back, he reverted back. And I think one of the reasons why they revert back is because those behaviors are so deep. And they're coping behaviors, they're coping mechanisms. Sometimes I'll do something and I'm like, and I'll know I do it. I'm like, ugh. And it drives me bonkers because I'm working so hard to undo and I only do it with my really intimate sphere. It's very much defense tactics. It's very much narcissistic wounds or even narcissistic behaviors. But if I'm fully aware, this is what I do. Like, this is what I wrote a book about. I think people get so conditioned to doing it. And that's why I think the advice is, sever ties, because they're not going to change. Because I think a true narcissist doesn't even think they have a problem. Right? So you go from one, if they don't even have a problem, they're not going to go to therapy. When I first really started to have compassion and empathy for myself and what I went through, the empathy started to bleed out to him of like, gosh, if this is so hard for me to break.
Interesting.
And then I started to see about his mother. I started to really understand that all my father was me in a different set of clothing with a different life circumstance, right? Maybe, yes, he had made different adult choices than I did. And so I want to honor that I chose differently. But I look at the deck that was stacked against him too. And he didn't have another family, right? Like I had my mother's side of the family that he didn't have other resources. So
let's
yeah.
recap.
Sorry.
No, you don't know how grateful I am, really. So if anyone is listening to this and they're in a relationship where they just feel, if you're in a relationship where you feel like you are less than, regardless of whether there's a diagnosis, you need support.
Yes.
You need to get help.
And questioning yourself a lot. Are you questioning yourself? Are you questioning whether that was real, or did you say that or not? Or question who you are. Yes,
I think that is so important, because there are things that we should question about ourselves, question our decision, question our thinking. But if another person is making you feel like what you know is true is not true.
About you,
About
about Lisa, about Tammy, about like
right,
that you've known since you were 5.
right.
That's
It's not cool.
that's not cool.
So if you find yourself drawing into your life people who maybe they own the room when they walk in and they seem really confident and they seem like, oh, this is going to be a strong friend, a strong relationship. Like, this is really cool. But then within a short period of time, you are overwhelmed with being consumed by this person. And then the other thing happens that suddenly it just doesn't feel, if you're in a relationship and it doesn't feel right, ask yourself why you were in a relationship that doesn't feel right. And why are we drawn to these relationships? And that could probably be another hour discussion. So if you feel unsafe emotionally, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally and spiritually, it's just not a good place to be. And it's okay to not be in it.
Yes.
And that last part, I think, is exceptionally hard for a lot of people. For one, for many people, they've already invested so much time and love and energy, and you want to make it work. How do you walk away from that, right? So you've already.
And I think it's really important to tell people you did not fail.
Speak to that if you would, please.
Yeah, you can't win with a narcissist. I've heard from so many people that they feel like they failed their commitment, or they feel like they failed their vows, or that they failed the other person to not do more or try harder or whatever.
Just one more time.
Just one more
Give
time.
me
And
one
in
more
so
time.
many of these situations, it has nothing to do with you. You can try, and most people that I speak to, they've tried more than your average bear ever would, right? Like my mother took back my dad 3 times. I, through countless abusive situations, kept trying to think that I was going to save him, that I was going to fix him, because I saw the beautiful soul. See, and that's the other thing about empaths. So a lot of people that are drawn to narcissists are empaths. They're really empathic, loving, wholehearted people. You see the person that's in there, past the armor, past the crap, past the insecurities. And what you want to do is because when it's good, it's so good. When it's good, it's so good. And so you want to drag that person out. But that shell, that crap, those walls, all of that stuff, only they can undo. And if you've given them multiple opportunities to say, I want to help you, but you've got to see what I see. You've got to acknowledge that what I see is real.
And do more than just say, yeah, I know you're right.
They have to
something
work
about it.
They have to go see a therapist. They have to read books. They have to start undoing why it is they got into this situation, which usually has to do with their past and their parents and their previous upbringing or their upbringing as a child. You got to do the work.
And footnote, it doesn't matter if you do the work.
Yeah,
you can read all the books you want.
That's what I mean by you didn't fail, because your ability to win or fail to succeed or fail isn't contingent upon your behavior. It's contingent upon them doing the work. And if they don't do the work, you're succeeding by walking away because they've chosen not to do the work. And that is not your fault. And it is not your responsibility to force somebody to do the work. Only they can choose to do the work.
And in fairness, it's not your right
That's
change
right.
anybody. Even if you could change them, it is their right to choose who they want to be. It's just that in that choosing, they also choose the consequences.
Yes. And that's why I use the term returning to whole. My wholeness was directly related to not letting somebody else rearrange my level of success. It's returning to finding our way back to who we were supposed to be, or who we were meant to be. And that for me was going back to that. What do I know that's true about myself? What do I know about that 5-year-old?
How did you do it? Let's talk about that. Like, how did you get out of, and I don't mean by getting out of, I don't mean saying leave the relationship. I don't think either of us are in a position to be telling people, leave your marriage, leave your parents. So please, anybody who's hearing this, do not think that we are giving advice about your relationships. These are just like things to look for. And this is how you might be feeling. Talk to somebody who's a professional. But how did you do it?
It's slow. I'm still doing it. Mm-hmm. So I want to be very clear that I haven't conquered this nut. I struggle with the ghosts of this every day. However, the path for me was about identifying what things were put in place that I never consented to. I didn't consent to my father making me feel like I put my priorities last. I didn't consent to that. I didn't consent to, I did it to survive because that's what children do. I didn't consent to believing that I need to shrink in order to make other people feel comfortable. So I had to determine what are the things that I was believing to be true about myself that I never consented to, A, and then say, okay, well, if I'm going to tear those things down, what's going to happen when I do? And then understanding who's going to be really uncomfortable in that process. So for example, codependency really doesn't like to be ripped apart at all.
By design.
By design. Right. And so one of the things, and I'll talk about it because one of the kind of unsung heroes in this is my mother, when she read the book, felt, first of all, triggered.
Your book?
Yes.
Okay.
Because so many things, she felt like she should have intervened more with my father. She felt that, oh gosh, she didn't do enough, or she didn't do. One of the things my mother courageously raised me to be because of her situation was extraordinarily autonomous and independent. And so the side effect of that, though, even in a codependency relationship, is that when I was old enough to search out my dad, I did it viciously independent, right? Like, meaning, Mom, you can't tell me what to do and what not to do. Like, it kind of backfired, but it didn't. So she raised me to be in such a way that she knew she couldn't insert herself anymore, right? Like, this was my relationship. I had to figure this out on my own. But that's what I mean by it takes it whole down, because my mother and I really rumbled around, is she going to be okay reading this? Do I have a right to entangle our stories and tell the world about her role in this or not? Like, people told me it's a very courageous thing to do. I think some of the people that were the most courageous were the ones that were behind the scenes, that were supporting me in this, meaning my husband, my mother, that were supporting me in this kind of coming out about my story, because it all entangles them. And so I had to understand the entanglement. And
I would assume comes the responsibility of accepting, like, if you're going to hurt people by speaking up, then you have to accept that they have a right also to tell you that you've hurt them. I mean, there's a responsibility there.
That's right. And so I had to take full accountability.
Right.
But what was going to come crashing down when those keystones came down? And then also, I got a text from my dad. My dad has passed. My dad passed in 2015, but my dad's partner of 35 years. He said, "Oh, I didn't know you wrote a book." And he goes, "I just ordered a copy." And I had like a small heart attack. It's like, oh God. I said, just so you know, I said, I don't think that this may not be therapeutic for you. And he came back with like the best response ever. He said, "Your dad was at times the easiest person to love, and at other times the hardest person to love." And he summed it up so much better than I could sum up. My friend from college, she texts me a lot, and she'll text, like, when she gets a text from her family member that is this way. And, one day she'll be like, I think visitation is right for my children and I said, "Fabulous." And then the next minute she'll text me again and say, "No, that was the worst decision." I've learned that you ride the waves with people. Like if you are listening to this and you are a family member of someone that's going through this, or a friend that's going to, you just provide that unconditional love and you just ride the wave with them. Because again, that's what they need. They just need that love to be like, whatever you decide is the right thing for you right now.
I don't think that can be overstated.
No.
Because I think of the embarrassment that comes with, what will people think if I stay? What will people think if I go? What will people think if I give this person another chance? And they've seen me make all these, they've seen all the pain, and yet you're staying. That embarrassment is far too heavy and far too emotional to allow you to make a good decision if you're reacting to it.
Yes.
So that support that you're talking about, I think, is so priceless. And I'm sure hard to give.
Oh, it's so hard to give, because sometimes I just want to get just as mad, right?
Right.
call the person, that is hurting my friend and be like, so what are you doing? Because it's an emotional roller coaster. And there are times where these relationships, especially if it's family or you have children with the person, it's very hard to sever ties, And so in that, for example, one mother-daughter situation, mother was a narcissist. The mother was the gatekeeper to the person's father, who was dying of a terminal disease. So she was ready to break away, but she had to appease in order to have access to. Oh,
yuck.
So who's going to make that? You're going to tell that person no, you do what you got to do. So that's what, to get back to, what did I do? How did I do? Timing is critical. I tried to break down my keystones and try to break apart the codependency in my 20s, but I didn't have the resources or the support network or the confidence to be able to do it. And so I tried, and it failed miserably. Give myself some grace. But the timing is critical. Who else is around? Again, what are your resources? It could be the age of your children. There's so many things, but time, as long as you know in your head, okay, I'm going to hold on to this truth, but I'm going to wait for the right time. That's okay too. Everything's okay, honestly. You're coping with a difficult situation.
Have you experienced that, because of your experience with your dad, like that was your normal, that throughout your life you were drawn to people? Like, did you relive the same experience with different people?
Oh God, yeah. Someone told me the same people just show up in different clothes until we've learned how to heal whatever it is. There were certainly, I don't think my first husband was a full-fledged, I don't think he had 7 or 8 of the listed behaviors, but he definitely had some of the same coping mechanisms and issues as my father did. Previous employer, that one was a doozy, because of course your previous employer has money over your, so all the money triggers,
right, the puppet
came right back in, but like a moth to a flame. For a while there, I thought there's an incessant need to fix. There was this, or save. I want to say, maybe not fix, save. There's a couple books I want to recommend to people, and The Body Keeps the Score, and then, and I don't know how, it's Gabor Mate or even Peter Levine. Peter Levine's work in somatic experiencing. So I've been reading Waking the Tiger, his first book, really talks about the trauma is unresolved energy. And so if I looked at my experience with my dad as a trauma, it was traumatic for me to deal with him. The body, the mind, body, connection, spirit, everything will try to resolve the trauma. That's what PTSD, like you keep trying to do it over and over again. So what I kept trying to do was save a man that exhibited like my dad, because I was not able as a child to save him the way that I wanted to get out that beautiful, charismatic, funny, entertaining. He was a ball, from what I understand, talking to my relatives before alcoholism kind of took over. I was trying to get that guy back.
So you
I
would
wanted him to
be
dad.
drawn to people who needed that.
Yes. So I found, from employers to friends, even to this day, I will see somebody and have a soft spot, and I'll have it, and they could be a absolute a-hole, but I will, and the soft spot is that it's this need to complete the cycle. That's really what trauma does, and what it so for me, because mine was a series of events, I've had to go back and say, really process with myself of like, my father was never there for me to save. That was never my responsibility. And I still daily.
Is that tough?
So tough.
Yeah.
When I talked and got emotional about the behaviors, the narcissistic wounds, or the behaviors that I do that I don't like in myself, the shadow work is, for me, took on its own identity in that, or its own kind of path. It spiraled into all these things. But one of the things that was the most powerful for me, and what it spiraled into, was that the things that I hate in myself, or the things I hate in other people, life is but a mirror. And that I would judge, or I would project a lot. Like I would see somebody and they were doing something, and as soon as I kind of understood that the reason why I was having such a visceral reaction to somebody, good or bad, meaning, oh, I wanted to be that person, or that person, oh, I can't stand them, blah, blah, that it was all me. It was all my lens. It was all my, what am I comfortable with myself? What am I not comfortable with? The more I sat into that, and the deeper and deeper I went, the more I was like, because I realized that my father and I it was a mirror.
Same. Yeah.
So even just him talking to me, I think, he was talking to himself. So a lot of the stuff that I realized that he hated about himself, that when I exhibited it, because that was my natural being, all of his loathing came right out onto me. But I had to understand it from my lens of feeling what that felt like, of seeing something in somebody else and being like, oh, yeah, oh, I don't like that. I don't like that person at all. And then going, oh, Tammy, you don't like that person at all because that's something in yourself you're not willing to rumble with yet. Or what's that really about? So people that are, that are successful in something that I wanted to do, but I wasn't there yet. Instead of being like excited, instead of being like, yeah, I want to do that, and that's awesome, and go talk to the person and figure it, I would say awful things about that person in my head. I'd be like, well, they probably blah, blah, blah. What? And as soon as I sat in that ugliness is when I started to understand how really interconnected we all are. And that interconnectedness it's just one big weird we are one type of thing, where it's life is really but a mirror.
Wow.
That was really heavy. Sorry, we went down the heavy road.
No, I'm so grateful. There's an important thought. I keep saying that I had a sense of relief that I wasn't alone. And I kind of hate that thinking, because I've heard it used against people like, well, you're not the only one. And that is not at all what I mean.
No.
I mean that if you're feeling like you love someone who has these tendencies that hurt you, take comfort in knowing that there are others who understand how you feel. That's what I mean by you're not alone. I don't mean in any way to minimize, just the opposite. But there's also the fact that once we know something, once we even know maybe that we're being mistreated, we can no longer, my belief, say that we don't know. Once you know, yes. You know. Again, that doesn't mean that I say, leave the jerk. That is not at all what I'm saying. That's not my place. I'm not anything to say that. I'm not qualified. However, you can choose differently. One thing that I have learned personally is being really intentional about the friends I have chosen. which came only truly a few years ago. For the first time in my life, I chose friends who were supportive of me, who didn't need me to do anything, who weren't broken. They were just beautiful people. And it was the first time in my life I saw the power of being supported by others. So
Yes.
the only reason I say any of that is to say that if you are feeling this heavy aloneness and you're feeling like this is an impossible situation, am I crazy? I really love this person. This person's making me nuts. They're hurting me. If you can't leave, if you don't want to leave, that's totally your choice. But please find people who will love you.
Unconditionally.
Yes. And be the person, still be the person who wants to help. Because if they need help, be that person. That's fine. But be more than one thing.
Yes.
Don't just be the fixer. Don't just be the one who gives the love. Be willing to receive it as well.
I think that's another piece that's really hard for people that have been victimized. Because I will say it's a victimization. Is to really to put up. So a new keystone would be, I am worthy of receiving unconditional love. I am worthy. Period. I am worthy for just existing, not worthy because I'm hustling or because I'm busting my tail or because I'm this or that or whatever. No, you're just worthy. Period. Nothing else to add to that. Do you know what I mean? Like, you are worthy of it all, of success, of love, of help, of joy, of peace of mind, of relaxation. I mean, fill in the blank. It's like, I don't have to hustle for my worthiness. Like, I just know, like, I know I'm worthy. I have to tell myself that every day because I don't believe it every day, right? I also talk about healing as a process of unlearning. I have to unlearn the tendency to get hooked by wanting to save somebody. I have to unlearn that I don't need to come rushing to situations for people to think that I'm a good friend. I have to unlearn, right? There's all these things that I've done for, 40 years. I'm not going to wake up one day and be like, hey, look at me with all these new behaviors. Like, it's a process, but it can feel really daunting.
So everything you just said right there is the answer. If you're listening and you're driving in your car or you're walking right now, and the voice in your head is, who do you think you are? Then everything you just said is the answer.
Yes.
You are a person, and that alone warrants love. Maybe we do need to earn respect on other levels, but to just be accepted as a person.
Yes.
And that's not always easy to accept. It's just not always easy.
No.
Because the who do you think you are is a much louder voice.
Oh, yes. Who do you think you are? And I think it's a test every day, not only for yourself. So it's every time I meet somebody that is mean or angry or all the things that are uncomfortable to me, for me, I also have to remind myself that I don't have to, I can choose not to be around that person, right? I can choose that that's not healthy for me. But that person is still worthy.
Wow.
And that's been for me the real everyday,
That's interesting.
the push and pull of like, no, I have choice. Like, that's, we want to belong to a group. We want to feel love and acceptance and belonging. But the thing we also have to remember is that we all get to choose where we put our attention. And so you can belong in this place because that's where you're choosing to put you, but you don't. If other people have behaviors that are triggering to you because you're not there in your process to be able to meet them where they are, you shift your attention. You don't have to pay attention to that. You don't have to fix it. You don't have to obsess about it. You just shift your attention And that allows, you're not caring about them. Sometimes the best way to care for them is to shift your attention, because your response is not going to be helpful or healthy for them because of your own stuff. So it's really the process of knowing yourself, choosing, and then really being conscious around where you choosing to put your attention.
I love that. And
Yeah,
I think,
it really, last year I just went like, it just opened my mind, because yeah, sorry, I just cut you off.
no, I just think it's so important because it covers two needs. That it's okay to have needs and to address those needs, and that you don't have to hate the other person, that or discredit them or devalue them. It's not a judgment against them. It's just recognizing that you aren't qualified, and you aren't qualified to fix them, and you aren't obligated to endure.
No.
But you don't have to have bad feelings, and it's better
No.
not to have bad feelings, because that doesn't do any good anyway.
No. And I'm just not therapeutic for them. They're probably not therapeutic for me. I'm not therapeutic for them. I'm not the best fit for their energy at this moment. And that's okay, but it doesn't diminish their worthiness of being a human on this planet who deserves love and all the other, the things that we all need and want.
I remember much younger coming to the realization. I remember hearing people say a lot, oh, they're just doing this for attention. They're just doing this for attention. And it occurred to me, if somebody is going to that length for attention, give them attention. Maybe not the attention they want, but give them what they need. And maybe in this circumstance, it is removing yourself. It is giving them what they need. Maybe attention is the wrong word, but if a person needs something, give them what they need.
Yes.
Sometimes, though, that means removing yourself, because if you're feeding into their unhealthy tendencies, that is not what they need. It just isn't what they need.
Right.
And it also makes me realize that none of this is to say that intellectually you don't get this. There is, in my experience, a vast difference between knowing I deserve, you can tell yourself all you want, I deserve better, this isn't right, and all of this. But once your heart is in it, be ready for the battle, because it's not easy. So we are not saying that people who find themselves in these situations are unintelligent, don't make good decisions in other areas of their life, or in any way lack capabilities, just find themselves somewhere that those qualities are used against them.
Yeah. And even if they, I think to add to that, if people choose, they listen to this and they say, you know what, I'm not sure if the relationship I'm in fits the bill for this or not, or not sure. But today I'm choosing, right? I'm choosing to stay, or I'm choosing to continue to focus my attention to figure it out. Fantastic. I think it's also a process of discovery at first. It's the discovery around, why do we do the things that we do? Is there meaning in them? Without I can overanalyze. I can go way down the what if this, what if this, what if this? At some point it just is what it is. Changing your behavior and changing the actions and making changes, that will come, but that's the hard part. So slow and steady sometimes people do it abrupt, sometimes there's no right or wrong answer. It's so contingent upon what people are going through.
So to recap, what would you say, and it's going to be, I don't envy you the answer to this question, what would you say to people who relate to what you have said, what our conversation is, and have the questions and feel like, oh, what do I do now? Understanding that we have said a number of times, we are not qualified to give advice. So I'm not saying that. However, can you offer any support?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think, well, I mean, I do want to offer a line, meaning we can share my contact information.
Thank you.
I'm so passionate about this type of stuff. If anyone is like, I really don't know, and I can if someone wants to share more depth with me, right, around what are the circumstances, what's this, I'm more than happy to hop on a call with people and just kind of chat it out. So there's that. That's the first thing.
So support.
So
You
support.
said is vital.
Support is absolutely vital. If you have a friend who, if you have a friend that you trust, right, someone that may have known you for 30 years or 40 years, chances are the friend, if you've known him that long, they're not going to be the person that's going to come to you and be like, hey, I think your spouse is a piece of poop, or I really don't like it when your spouse says these things to you. They're going to love you. They're not, they don't know where you're at. And people are very hesitant to talk about critiques to family members, spouses. So if you go to the network and say, hey, listen, I've got this. And this has got to be someone who's on your 3 top, meaning you could tell your shame story to. Usually we only get a couple of those people. It would be that person.
Okay.
And I really want to run something by you, right? I think this, or I've had a new awakening about this. Am I off here? Have you seen anything? Like, give them the door to share another perspective and see what they say. Because they might be a lifeline to you, validating that you're not crazy, validating that, oh yeah, no, I see it too. And here's what I saw. It's going to be, so if you open that door though, be prepared, because sometimes people aren't very good at gently stepping into what they see.
And in fairness, even when we hear what we want to hear, sometimes we don't want to hear it.
We don't want to hear it. So be prepared that you might hear some things that are not, but I do think that person can help you, can help people validate their reality, right? Be that second voice when it seems strange or off over here. Be the other voice of like, was I nuts when that, I mean, I remember reading my friend Jen, we've known each other since kindergarten. I would go to her house and I would read these crazy text exchanges to her and be like, and then he said this, and then she said this. And she would just look back at me and she would go, Tammy, you're trying to rationalize with crazy. Mm-hmm. You can't rationalize with crazy. Like, what are you doing? Stop. And at times I wanted to, strangle her. Sometimes I wanted to be like, what are you talking about? He's like my father. I can't. And I go back to that. It was probably one of the best pieces of advice, but it sounded dismissive at the tongue, but she really didn't know what to say, because this was an every couple months occurrence. But I knew I could go to her and be like, hey, listen, and she would tell me, she'd be like, listen, no, you're not crazy. This is what's going on. This is what, he's not capable of doing this. So she was like my sanity until I was able to kind of break away. She was the one that would check me into that space of like, no, you're fine. No, you're not a bad person. No, you're not. Like, you need that voice in your head, because unfortunately, if they've done their job good enough, sometimes your voice is kind of impaired. So you need the other voice to bring you back to your instinct voice of like, no, I know I'm worthy. I'm not, you know what I mean? So support is critical. Find a trauma therapist. So that was a mistake I made early on. There's a lot more now, and I think it's part of the curriculum now for many therapists. But early on, when I first started finding therapists, it was not good. But I think trauma-informed therapists are critical, because
let's just say any abuse causes trauma. You do not have to have lived through war to have PTSD.
Yes, with an exclamation point. We are just starting to understand as a society how like, if you ask me, like, what all of our social problems have to do with, they all have to do with trauma. You want to talk about the drug problem? Go walk the streets of Manchester, New Hampshire, and talk to someone with a drug issue, or in a homeless shelter, or in, like, you name it. they'll tell you, they'll go right back to the trauma. And trauma is so pervasive. And it isn't, like you said, trauma is also neglect. And so emotional unavailableness can be a trauma. There's, from a parent, it's not this, you have to have this horrible,
it's not an incident based.
Yes, it's not an incident. I think people think of trauma as, like the way that we think ER, like someone was in a fire or someone drowned or someone was beaten and died, or, these and believe me, those are horrible. And I'm not trying to diminish those at all. Those are a different level type trauma. But you ask any woman about sexual assaults. My point is trauma-informed therapy is really critical, because this is a trauma situation. People have been traumatized by someone to devalue their sense of self-worth. And that is a repeated and subtle pattern of trauma, of victimization, of making someone feel literally that they can't trust themselves.
So as we've described the person who may be in the narcissist relationship, constantly choosing people who treat them that way, it would seem reasonable that the person who themselves, will just say, who hurts other people, is doing the same thing and is not happy about it either.
No.
It's not like they're happy with what they do, but
what they're doing. Yeah. And some are conscious of it, and some, I think it's very subconscious. It's like a pattern that's just, they've developed.
But clearly, a person who is well-adjusted and happy doesn't hurt other people.
Right.
They just don't. They just don't. So they need help too.
They need help too. Yeah. It's harder to get, narcissistic behaviors to therapy. But that doesn't mean that it can't happen.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've noticed, I also have a history with sexual abuse, but with some of these behaviors that you feel over time, is that you can feel like you're out of your body. And that may or may not make sense to some people listening. You feeling it for me, it was like a disassociation. Like I disconnected myself from my body. I wouldn't listen to, so I was in a hypervigilant state all the time, like expecting something bad to happen, like that shoe to drop. Like if something was going good, because I was so used to being in a bad state or in a walking on eggshells state, that hypervigilance of like, is he going to call today? Or I would see his phone, ring, and I would start shake. So I actually got used to holding energy, shaky physiological energy in my body. Hypervigilant, nervous, like your nervous system needs to be re-regulated, because your nervous system has been on, using kind of layman's term, been cranked up to like 10 on the dial. Right. It's not supposed to stay there all the time. It's supposed to be there for your fight, flight, or freeze. Like if you've been put in a real threat.
Right.
What happens in these situations is that you've been in that fight, flight, or freeze, or fawn. And so your nervous system has been deregulated. And at that 10 mark, some physical therapies, craniosacral therapy, some of those body work really dials that down, because you're really starting to process your adrenal glands. Like I could go on and on about cortisol and all these. Yeah. But what we find is that so many trauma survivors have gut issues, stomach problems, bowel problems, because they're holding all of this stuff. They're holding all of this energy, and their nervous system is basically just spent.
There's a conversation I had with a Dr. Amy Novotny. She's in Sedona, Arizona, and she talks about that. And her focus is mainly talking about how she can help people physically. So if they have back pain, that sort of thing. But it's based on the same premise, that the trauma endured until you tell your body that you are no longer going through the trauma, so you no longer have to be in the state of protecting yourself. That even if you've gone through the emotional therapy, that unless you let your body know it's okay, it's going to protect you. And it doesn't know to relax. So she made this excellent point. So if you are in that state where you're constantly like just ready to go, and then you lie down and it's time to go to sleep, you think that closing your eyes is enough to go to sleep. Your body has been told for years, get ready, come on, get ready, right? And so you'll pull your back for seemingly no reason at all.
Mm-hmm.
But of course there's a reason. So you haven't done anything differently, but for some reason this time your back is just in such pain, and there's nothing that shows up in the x-rays. And so she works with people through breathing technique, through very scientifically sound techniques,
mm-hmm.
to get rid of those things. It's fascinating.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I'll connect you with her.
That would be great. I mean, these practitioners, they're, in my mind, they're so needed. All of this research is pointing to the mind, body, spirit connection, that what we experience, and that's why the book, The Body Keeps the Score. That's exactly what he's talking about.
Yeah.
He's talking about you have internalized your, so you may say, like, because what happens as adults is we just function, or as children, we
just keep going.
Just keep going. They function. Yeah. The miraculous nature of the body to keep going is fascinating. But it comes at a cost, and it comes at a consequence.
Yeah.
And so all of these symptoms, I've spoken to many people who have had the traditional Western medicine lack of diagnosis.
Right.
And they realize that it has to do with the mind-body connection, and something that they need to dive deeper into. There's a word that I've been kind of obsessed with lately, alchemizing. It's like alchemy, like thinking about chemistry, right? That really what you're doing is you're trying to alchemize the trauma energy. You're trying to turn it into something else, right? You're trying to process it. You're trying to, because it's
not going to go anywhere.
It's not going to go anywhere. That's right. You're not going to be like, bye, Tammy, that was a different part of you. No, and I actually don't want that to happen.
Right.
At the beginning of the book, there's a quote by Rumi: "The wound is the place where the light enters you."
Oh,
yeah.
I'm gonna have to give that some thought. Huh.
And I just loved that, because it's not saying to fix the wound or it would say fix it, but not make the wound go away. And I feel that that's a little what trauma feels like, is that the wound, when you start to process the energy and you start to alchemize and maneuver it and work with it, you realize that there's this beautiful light, empowerment, power, strength, truth, like that you just come into, but it came through there.
Yeah.
So I just love that quote.
I've taken so much of your time. I'm so, so grateful that you would share with such honesty and vulnerability.
Thank you.
For the sake of those who may be in a position. And it bears repeating that if you're listening to this and it resonates with you, or you know of somebody who is going through something like this, make an educated decision, whatever that is. Whatever that is. Just choose. Because realize that by not choosing, you're choosing anyway. So
yes,
choose. I would be very interested in knowing the answer to the question, how do you want to be seen? What would you say to people? How do you want to be seen?
So you asked me this obviously before, today. So I've been thinking a lot about this. And there was a moment about a month or two ago, my son, who's 3, had come out of the bedroom or back playroom area, and I didn't hear this. My husband had heard it, and he's 3. Just to be clear, he's 3. He came out and he told, out of nowhere and out of the blue, he looked at my husband and said, Daddy, the only truth is love. And my husband kind of just, he told me, he just kind of, like trying to play it off like that was a normal thing for 3-year-olds to say. But he was curious. He said, where did you hear that? And, he said, hey, okay, Finn, where did you hear that? And he goes, I've noticed since I was a baby. And he told me the story, and I was like, are you for real? You just pulling my chain. Like I really looked at my husband like, what are you talking about? And so when you asked me the question, that was really the first, and I said, and so the who am I came up, because if you'd asked me, how do I want to be seen? I don't think this is a, how do I think I'm seen now? But if I feel like I've done my job in this life, by the time it ends, I guess I just want to be seen as love.
Well, apparently you are right now to little Finn, because he's learned it from someone. Tammy,
Yes.
thank you. Just
Thank you.
thank you. I know that I asked for an hour and you've given me twice that. And I am.
It's a complicated issue, and there's lots. I mean, we could probably go for another, a series of 5 or 6. There's a lot to unpack with it. So I hope it kind of gave an overview, but I'm truly honored and happy to be talking about it.
Thank you. And if you need help, just get help. So we're going to make sure that people can reach out to you. And you've mentioned so many resources by way of books and authors, and I'll try to link as many of those as possible too. But just thank you.
Thank you.
Really, for doing this.
Absolutely.
Wow, that was a really long prelude, wasn't it? And a really, really long conversation. I hope that it allows you to see a few things. First, as I said initially, you're not alone. And I tried to reiterate that in the conversation by saying that when we say you're not alone, or that you're not the only one going through this, it isn't in that really condescending way, like, well, other people have done this. I kind of hate that. It's not that. It's more in that sort of arm around the shoulder. I get it. I know this is really, really a painfully difficult situation to be in, and if I can help, I want to help. That kind of, you're not alone. Also addressing the legitimately crazy making way that this environment can create. By its nature, it just makes you second guess yourself a lot. It produces an unsettling environment. And by that, I mean you kind of don't know what's real. And so as you can imagine, walking through life, not knowing if the next step, not only if the next step is right, but if there's anything there to support you, that's unsettling. The upcoming conversation with Sonia Lynn will continue this conversation a little bit about what is narcissism and its tendencies. But it's also going to go a lot more into what is it about those individuals who are drawn toward these personalities. That may be a more difficult conversation to hear. But having already had it and thought a lot about it, the difficulty should not stop you from listening. It puts the responsibility, as it should be, on those who maybe are the enablers. It does not take the responsibility away from those who introduce the pain in the relationships, but it does say, okay, once you know, you know. And with that knowledge comes not just a responsibility, but a great deal of empowerment. You can then take that knowledge and make some decisions. And so that upcoming conversation, I hope, will be one that you also listen to. And with all of that, if there's anyone out there who is interested in having a small but a little bit broadened conversation around this, I would like to host that, having one of these women on and just allowing you to ask your questions. and having them share their experiences. So, whew, that was a lot. If you've listened to any of my episodes, you know that I try to wrap it up by asking you to be safe and kind. And it seems like that these conversations highlight that even more. It emphasizes the need to be safe in many ways, not just around COVID, not just physically, but in some much more profound ways. The being kind, I stand by that. I stand by the need to be kind. But I also recognize that sometimes that kindness is diluted. So if you need support, get support. That's what I'll say. And absolutely, thank you so much for listening.